So my name is Danyka, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Waterloo, and I'll be moderating the panel today. So I just want to thank all of you for joining, and I also want to thank our panel. I mean, maybe I biasly think that we have such a rock star panel today, and I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with them. But I also want to thank the development team who has worked tirelessly over the last year putting together all the seminars as well as this one. And this whole, really successful seminar series. So thank you to the team and H3S members in general. So with that, I'm going to first get the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start off with Caitlyn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlyn Hall. I am a PhD candidate at Arizona State University in Natural Hazards and Environmental Engineering. I'll pass it over to Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Gasparini. I am an associate professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I use she, her pronouns. I think Chris is after me.
Hi, I'm Chris Lowry, and I'm associate professor at the University of Buffalo, and I'm a geologist. And I have no clue who's going next, so.
I think I'm next. I think we're going in alphabetical order. My name is Julian Reyes, and I'm a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow in the Office of Global Change at the U.S. Department of State, and my background is in civil engineering.
I'm Sheila Saia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher at North Carolina State University in Dr. Natalie Nelson's lab, and my background is in hydrology and biogeochemistry.
Great, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about the culture of academia and interpersonal relationships between us and our colleagues. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, a few of us work in isolation, and a lot of the success in our career and our science rely on having strong relationships with our students or our lab mates, our colleagues, or just people in our kind of larger network. And of course, part of forging these strong relationships is being able to have good, honest, and sometimes difficult or awkward conversations with our peers. And so on this topic, we asked the community to send us some questions through our Google Forms. And I just want to remind everyone that you're also welcome to ask questions in the chat box. And so we just asked, the community to come up with questions, and so we could put together this Q&A panel. And so we're going to start. We have three different sections that the questions kind of fall under, and we'll start by discussing on how to have honest conversations about the culture in academia. So our first question, which was going to be directed to Nicole, but like I said, everyone could answer. How do you think advisors or students can begin having conversations with their lab groups or professional circles about difficult topics like mental health or implicit bias and work-life balance and other topics like that? How do you breach those conversations?
Okay, well, this is a great question because I personally feel that the more open and the more we can communicate with each other. I feel this way as I'm an advisor. I advise graduate students, undergraduate students, postdocs, students in my classes, and I am always telling them, if you communicate with me, I can better support you. But that being said, I find communication incredibly difficult. It's one of my weaknesses, and I often will tell prospective graduate students, if you want to join my group, you really have to be a good communicator to make up for the fact that I am a stinky communicator. And so one of the things that is brought up in this question is, how do we have not just regular communication, but difficult communication? And I want everyone to remember that I, as an advisor, and you all as students, we're all some kind of earth scientists, I think, here. We're not trained communicators. We don't have background in psychology. And so we don't oftentimes know what we're doing. So what I've tried to do as an advisor is, if I know or I have a good feeling that a student might need some support when it comes to mental health, I reach out to the offices on campus that are experts in mental health. And I say, here's what I think I'm seeing. Can you support me? And so similarly, I would say for students, you should absolutely do the same. I started graduate school in 1995, and there was not as much awareness as there is now. I would never have known what office to go to on campus. Now there's like student support services, there's counseling. Use those kinds of opportunities to actually go and talk with someone else to help you approach these conversations with the people that you need to have these conversations with. These are all really hard things. And oftentimes as a student, you're going to know that your advisor sort of was brought up in a system that said there is no such thing as work-life balance. And you're expecting this work-life balance, but I didn't get any work-life balance. And so those are really difficult conversations to broach. And so one of the things that I do with my students, like say, I want to have a conversation about bias, and I might know that some of my students might not really recognize what bias is. I give them a paper to read and I say, let's discuss this paper. Paper discussions don't always have to be about, the hydrologic model that you're going to use for your research. And so you can also give your advisor resources that can help them to understand you and the community better. So hopefully your advisor is maybe not necessarily educated on mental health, but is a reasonable person. And I think we have to start there when we have these conversations. Help them have the resources that they need to understand what you need. So I'll stop it there because I could talk forever.
I think that's a great answer. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? I know that within my lab group, it's funny that you brought up the paper because I know that that's something that we did recently. I think we had instead of one of our group meetings that we usually talk about like our science or the work that we're currently doing, we read 10 steps to have an anti-racist lab. And I think that it just takes the pressure off one person being kind of this beacon of information, and it really gives it to people who, wrote the paper, who probably know better. And then you're really able to put the expertise onto someone else. So I think that's an excellent point to start. Okay, so this is going to Chris and Nicole. So I'll ask Chris to start off with this. And so since you guys are advisors, how can advisors kind of foster this cohesive or cooperative relationship, kind of this welcoming lab culture within your lab group? I think that being able to have a sense of belonging to your lab group and making sure that it's a kind of a safe place is really important for some students. So how are there approaches that you guys take, or do you think that, do the students kind of just do that themselves?
I think each lab group has its own kind of flavor to it, right? And I think that early on, I think that it's important for an advisor and a student to just kind of talk about their working styles and what they do well and what they do poorly, right? And I mean, Nicole talked about that just a second ago. Like, I think you need to identify your weaknesses. And I think it's really important to, both as a graduate student and as a faculty member, to simply say, man, there are sometimes I am wrong. And there may be a conversation where I may be totally wrong and you can't tell me I'm wrong yet, but I need you to come back to me when I've cooled down or you've cooled down and just simply say, Chris, I actually think you were wrong there, and this is why. And I think that especially when difficult things are occurring, sometimes it is easier to set up a time when you can talk about that other than have it at the heat of the moment. And that I think is especially important, is just to realize that people are very different, and have a plan before something goes wrong, right? And I think having a plan is pretty important.
Yeah, I think Chris brings up a really great point, is that we are all people first. And I love what he said about difficult conversations, because one of the things that we know is that many people who are in academia have a lot of ego, right? And we're used to being right. And so one of the most difficult things is to say sorry. And everyone can say sorry. Advisors can say sorry, even though it seems impossible. And many advisors were never, when they were students, never saw their advisors saying sorry. But sorry really goes a long way. And especially this year, when so much wrongs have been brought to light for everyone, just starting to healing often starts with sorry or acknowledgement. And I know a lot of times that women are criticized for saying sorry all the time. And so maybe you need to tone it back depending on who you are, but realizing that you make a mistake and then working to right it is a really important thing. I also think advisors every lab is different, and every lab needs to figure out how they can create a cooperative environment in that lab. So lab rules can be simple things like, we don't eat in this laboratory. They can also be, we respect each other in this laboratory. You know, a few years back, as I was starting to be a little bit more aware, I created lab rules that I posted up when you walk into the lab. And I sort of got a lot of snickers from my students, because I put on the lab rules that science and research is supposed to be fun. So try to have fun and enjoy yourself once in a while. And everyone sort of, you know, scoffed at me like this crazy old lady. But that's the truth. And I think most of us are doing this and working long hours oftentimes because we love this. And so trying to remember that, and that everyone is working towards that same goal, to that fascination and excitement of finding out something new and learning something new. And so realizing that how others get there can be a little bit different, but supporting each other through that, I think, like remembering we all have the same goals can really go far to create a good environment.
I think those are great points, and that just makes me think of this thing that I try and tell myself all the time, and it seems like both of you were kind of just, you know, taking this approach that, you know, you have to be, you know, when we do science, kindness kind of goes a long way, you know, whether that's saying like, I'm sorry, I was wrong, or, you know, like science is supposed to be fun. So, you know, there's no need to be unkind, and just kind of trying to bring more kindness to science so that everyone can enjoy it. And it creates this positive environment that everyone could participate in.
Can I just touch on a question that Katrina just asked about what happens if your lab is toxic and you don't know what to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, this is something that's really, really important. And while at the graduate side, it's hard to see this, I'm going to say from the faculty side, it's okay to switch labs. It's okay to switch advisors. It's okay to switch institutions, right? Because what's really important is that you become a scientist. We need more good scientists. And I see so many young scientists get into a situation like you may say, like in a toxic lab that's just horrible, or bad conversation, you know, bad relationship, and they quit science and they go join the circus or something, right? Well, I don't need any more people in the circus. What I need is more scientists. And so it's okay to switch labs. It's okay to switch advisors. It happens. From a graduate student perspective, it's hard to see that. From the other side, we see it happen. It's no big deal. Like, don't be somewhere where you're unhappy. That's what I worry about. We need more scientists, and there are times when you're unhappy that are temporary, and there are times that are unhappy that are permanent. If it's a permanent unhappiness, dude, talk to someone about switching labs.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so like to expound a little bit, that the question was, what do you do if you realize you're in a toxic environment and no one's willing in the group to have these conversations? And I think that it's, from like a grad student perspective, is like, it's kind of scary to say like, I'm in a toxic situation, but I think that even recognizing that you're in one is a huge step, because like, I think it's easy as a grad student to say like, oh, this is a me problem. Like, I'm the one that sucks here, but then realizing that no, it's like an issue due to like power differential or whatever, because you say you're like, oh, just a grad student. No one's just a grad student. You are a grad student and you have your own power and your own social capital. And I think that it's hard to put oneself in a vulnerable position to say, I'm in a toxic situation, and talking to your peers about it, especially if people aren't talking about it. But there are usually university resources as well, because it's also hard to talk directly to someone that's the aggressor. That might make you feel more vulnerable. So in addition to what Chris was saying is like to transfer labs, there's also resources at your university, and this is a global thing. Almost all universities have this. I haven't seen one that doesn't, to help make that transition easier for you so that you aren't fearing retaliation or anything like that. And I think just like remembering that you have a strong community either at AGU or outside of your lab that like trusts you and believes you and will help you.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good segue to our next question. And I think, Caitlyn, you hit on a lot of the resources that you have to go to. So maybe just, Chris, if you feel like as the Director of Graduate Studies, at your institution, I realize that it's not always the same everywhere, but is there anything you could add to that? Like where can students go for this conflict resolution, or to kind of get maybe outside help to help with conflicts, particularly if it's like with an advisor or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, Caitlyn hit the nail on the head, right? If you have a problem with someone in your lab, you should talk to your advisor. If you have a problem with your advisor, you should talk to the Director of Graduate Studies. And that's what we're paid to do. Like as a Director of Graduate Studies, I'm paid. If you have a problem with the Director of Graduate Studies, you should talk to the department chair. But there are also ombuds people at the university. Every university has an office where you can get help with this. And if that all fails, there are very clearly defined grievance situations at universities where you can file a grievance, and people file grievances every single year. And there's sometimes where you need to file a grievance, and that's just how it is. But the chances are that someone along that line, right, the Director of Graduate Studies, the department chair, the ombuds people on campus, they can help you. The other thing is that if you're having a problem with someone, you're probably not the only person that's having a problem with someone, and that's something to realize. But the other thing I would say is you should always, I mean, this is on a kind of a legal side, you should always document what's going on. And one way of doing that is to write an email to yourself and say, I had this conversation and this is just what happened and this is how I feel, and send it to yourself. So that if there's ever a problem, and I hope there's never a problem, you will have some documentation of how things played out from your own perspective. And you can write this to yourself. I mean, I've done this before. Chris, I'm writing this to myself. This is how I felt. This is the situation I was in. This is what I was thinking. I don't know how to deal with this. Send, right? And it just goes into your inbox and you put it somewhere. But there are people to help in your department at the university. But we don't, as academics, we don't do a very good job of kind of politicizing that. Is that the right term? I don't know, whatever. Telling people about it. How's that?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. So I guess I think that there's some at least similarity of that ladder that you said across many universities. So maybe, check out your own university to see what the structure is. That's a great point. Okay. So we're going to be changing up a little bit. And so this question we're going to direct to Julian. And so scientists have been getting more engaged in science communication, and especially, I mean, this year in the US has been a crazy year, I guess is one way to put it. It's been a little bit of an intense year. So, scientists have been getting involved in social and political implications. And then beyond that, the social part of their research as well. So how do scientists, specifically, junior scientists or grad students, engage with the public or engage in public debate and share political opinions respectfully without kind of risking repercussions? And I don't know, how do you feel like that? How would you approach that? I guess is really just.
No, that's a great question, actually, a series of questions, actually. And before I say anything, I just want to note that all of these views are my own and not of who I work for. I think we can agree that science is political. We need to understand that science affects policy and policy affects science, and obviously policy and politics are intertwined. But given that, there are still opportunities to engage with decision makers at all levels, right? It doesn't have to be politicians. It could be a city council, or it could be folks in different agencies, whether local, state, or federal. And you can ensure that you're a seat at the decision-making table. So that's one way to be involved in kind of ensuring that science has a role. But you can also engage, you had also asked about engaging with folks. You can engage with the public or communities, and at that scale, and you know, working with community members and ensuring that they have the right resources and or science or research to do whatever that community would like to do. And there are some great resources from the Union of Concerned Scientists on engaging with communities and building those partnerships. And I think in terms of engaging on social media, I think it's important to realize that whatever you put on social media stays on the internet forever. So if you do post something political in nature, that's probably going to be there forever. And you know, if you're on the job market, just realize that's probably going to be there. But I do think if you do want to become more active, whether that is on a political nature or more kind of engaging with the publics, that you should, you know, ensure that you are respectful and having conversations. And, you know, realizing when you're speaking with folks that have different values than you could still find ways to find, you know, what else you can agree on. So for example, I talked with someone from Orange County on a when we were still flying a while ago, and she obviously did not agree with Al Gore and climate change, but we could agree that water was important because, you know, there's not a lot of water in California, that she needed water for her horses and for her farm. So we found something that we could value together. So I think it's important to kind of find that space in between in order to kind of have those conversations. And I think it's about playing the long game in terms of not necessarily pushing a particular side or a viewpoint, but rather building trust and building those relationships, I think is most important. So I kind of said a lot of different things, but I think, you know, just realizing that it is still possible to have conversations for people who have different values than you, and that science should have a seat at the decision-making table.
And just to add on to that, it's always, I would also recommend going to AAAS, this website, because they also have a lot of resources. The policy affects science and science affects policy is definitely one of their mantras. So like eventually like everything also starts clicking a little bit more. But I think remembering that you're a scientist and a person with opinions and is still a citizen. And so just because you're a scientist doesn't mean that you have to step back. And I think that one misconception is that we're all, as individuals, objective because we're scientists. We're not. Like, science isn't objective. Like, even as we're writing peer-reviewed papers, like, our opinions are informing what we write, and those are fact informed and data informed, but at some point, like, you're still sharing opinions. And so I think going into these discussions with that in mind is really important, that these aren't just things that you're pulling out of the sky. Like, you're wanting to engage for a specific reason, and it's informed by what you're observing. So just keeping that in mind. And also when you're entering into these discussions, I hear a lot of folks that are trying to enter into policy. They're like, oh, politicians don't care, like, but because you can see this. And it's like, if you enter into these conversations with that mentality, you're going to get that mentality back. And politicians do care about science. Like, surveys say that it's like, what, more than 70% of all politicians support basic research. It's just that there are a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different priorities that they're battling with. So I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm like, we need to really care about water or something. But then they're also like, well, we also have a pandemic happening. So actually all of this like discretionary money is going to go to pandemic rather than water this year. And so it's not that they don't care. It's just that like they have a bajillion other things that are influencing their decisions. And so going in with that level of understanding and remembering that like the staffers that you're talking to are still people is just really important to start relationship building and to see things also from their perspective, so you don't go in too aggressive.
I just quickly want to, sorry, Caitlyn, I just 100% agree with you. And I think, we are people too. And I remember, you know, when I was building kind of my brand on Twitter, even though I hate that word. It's like, yeah, you are a person too, and you have your right to opine on things. And as you mentioned, when we write papers, we're writing through our lived experiences, even though they are data driven. So I think that's important to realize, and all of our experiences are unique. And to build on kind of the social media thing, I was just thinking, if you are really worried about the different political aspects, you can have 2 accounts. I've seen that one is more professional and one is more personal. And that's just kind of if you would like to do it, that's kind of a way to get around that.
Yeah, and then to your point about risking repercussions, I think that everyone is nervous to do something for the first time. So finding a place to fail safely is usually what I try to set up for others and what you can try and look for. So the National Science Policy Network has a network of like groups that in all of the different states that you can try and talk to see if how you can get involved. Additionally, at least in the US, there's a government relations office, and they'll probably have engagement opportunities with local legislators as well. So National Science Policy Network and your government relations office at your university are good places to start if you don't know where.
That's a great answer, guys. Actually, I think that's very well-rounded answer, and I think that does raise some interesting kind of afterthoughts. And I just want to make a note that while I think that these resources that Caitlyn mentioned were from the US, I think that it might be worthwhile to, if someone in the audience is familiar with any sort of international ones, in Canada or in a different country, the CUAHSI channel, just turn to the CUAHSI channel and just, you can post your links there, or maybe you can solicit some help from people in our network to find some in your country. Okay, so our next question is going to go to Sheila. And now this is based on, your background. Of course, you're a hydrologist, but I think that you had a little bit of a kind of more ag background at times, and a little bit interdisciplinary, we'll say. So we wanted to know, do you have tips for cultivating productive and respectful collaborations that span multiple disciplinaries, or that span disciplinary silos?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is to be authentic, and ideally you're really excited about approaching someone for a collaboration, and so I think it's really good to show that excitement and passion, and it's often contagious. And I think also I think Nicole talked a little bit about saying sorry, but I also think just generally being vulnerable, you don't have to know all the answers, and maybe that's exactly why you're approaching someone for a collaboration, because they have expertise in an area that you don't have. And regarding that is respecting that expertise, and knowing that you probably never will understand all the minutia of their field, and just letting go of that and not trying to steer the direction of the collaboration. And then also just, I think one important thing is, especially when you're working with other disciplines, is to be aware of your field's cultural or culture and tendencies, and how you approach research questions and the tools that you typically use, and how those might be different from the collaborators' tools. And you can actually talk about that, what types of questions are you hoping to ask? What types of questions are they hoping to ask? And where are you going to meet in the middle? Or how are you going to meet in the middle? And then also thinking about just being patient. And I think we talked a little bit about this before. I think several people mentioned just it's okay if something doesn't come out of it right away. You're building a collaboration, you're building a relationship with someone during times that aren't chaotic or crisis periods, so that in the long term, you when you both have some idea and it's the right time, you can come together and to have a fruitful collaboration. So I think, yeah, not rushing it, and just taking it one step at a time. And if the snowball keeps rolling, that's cool. If it doesn't, then it's fine too. And yeah, I guess generally just thinking about being respectful, like when you do have a good collaboration, like if someone says they can't do something or they have to step back, like don't take that personally and move forward in a way that works for everyone. And also to have empathy and give people enough time. So I know like oftentimes we might, have a deadline coming up, but I think it's really important to say like, okay, this is what I have in mind, like this deadline, I'm going to give you 2 weeks to review this. Is that enough? And try to negotiate on that. And just like setting up, I think the other thing that I always think about with starting collaborations is like setting up expectations and outputs and things like that at the beginning. And I think that's especially important regarding like authorship and other things like that. So yeah, I think that's a lot to think about, and maybe the other panelists have some things to add too.
And I think some of those questions, or some of the things you brought up, I think we're going to be touching on a little bit later too. So it was a really great segue. But yeah, I think that you raised good points, just like, empathy, respect. And I think that's probably just safe for interdisciplinary relationships and just generally all relationships with academia, right? We're working with people, not robots. So, okay, so we're jumping to the next category now. We're going to try and speed through because I think that because of good conversation, we went a little slower than anticipated, but okay, so we're going to be changing to career choices and transitions. So talking about that, and this is where I think it's great that we have some, some research or institution, some advisors and people that are in kind of university institutions, as well as, Julian working at the Department of State. Sorry, I'm Canadian. I might have gotten that wrong. But so this question is going out to Caitlyn and Julian. So did you, and this is maybe more relevant to Julian because you're in a position right now, and I think Caitlyn, you just have had a lot of interest in kind of really bringing in policy into your research. But did you have to talk to your advisor and colleagues about your choices to pursue a position in policy instead of kind of the classical academia? I hate to use that word because, of course, there is no kind of classical academia. It's all valid. And then just generally, how would you kind of approach having a conversation with your advisor if they're kind of the mindset that like the real job is kind of the R1 tenure track job? How would you approach that?
No, that's a great question. I think Chris mentioned related to a different question that you don't want to be somewhere unhappy, but that also includes your post-degree aspirations. You don't want to be unhappy in academia or in any other sector if that's not where you want to be. So you should be honest with your advisor in terms of where you want to be post-PhD or post-master's. And I think your advisor doesn't necessarily have to be your mentor in particular or your advocate. These are kind of 3 separate roles. You can surround yourself with folks who will really support you in your endeavors and may not be even related to your PhD, but that's great. They can provide that sort of support, resources, and information that you need to do what you want to do in your life. And I think there are opportunities now, especially through AAAS, for example, to really find ways to use your science in all sorts of different sectors, whether that's academia, the government, or more in the non-governmental sector. And I think you should just be honest with your advisor. And I think in terms of my own experience, my advisor was very open to that. I think she already knew that I didn't really want to be a professor like her, but she herself was also, she noted to me that before I defended that I don't owe her anything. So I didn't have to finish papers, even though I probably should for my dissertation. But that, I think it depends on your own advisor, but that's the kind of relationship you should build with your advisor, and not one of like you owe them something, but rather they will support you in all of your endeavors. I think that's really important. But it is a difficult conversation. I know that, of course, I would assume that they probably do want you to kind of, continue on a legacy or, the great research they've been doing. But I think we should be honest with, the job, the environment that with different opportunities and the dwindling number of opportunities in certain sectors. And so I think that's just a difficult conversation to have, but noting that there are great ways to get support, and like this webinar, and just hearing about how people have begun those difficult conversations. And so I think this is also very useful.
Yeah, I agree. I think my advisor or one of my supervisors every month was like, so what do you think you want to do when you're done? Like year 2. And I was like, I don't know. And like, it was just like that every month. And I was like, I don't know, industry sounds fine. It sounds great. Next month it'd be like, I don't know, I saw this cool postdoc. And so I think it's also all right to not know what you want to do. But I think after like my own personal experience with this existential crisis during like 3 months of field work, I'd only seen my advisor and I was just like, I don't care about papers. Like you're like how I like measure my own value is not necessarily how academia measures value. And so I think that like, hopefully no one goes through this like crisis period of what am I doing with my life? But I think it's also really important to think what gets you up in the morning, and then also how do you define your own success? Because like how I personally define my success is the direct impact that I have on others. And I think that you can do that in academia. It just depends on like, how do you want to do it? And I think once I was able to explain, like, I want to impact people now, whereas academia is more like, I want to better the field for future impacts later, at least in my own field. Like recognizing like what drives you is really important. And then once you're able to communicate that to your advisors, that conversation about what you want to do is going to go a lot easier. Because once I was able to communicate that, it got a little bit better. But also recognizing that when I told my advisor that, he was like, awesome, I can't help you. And I'll try to put you in contact with someone that can, but I'm not the right person for this. And then I went to like my other 2 advisors and they're like, oh yeah, I have no idea, can't help you. And so then reaching out, like Julian mentions, like reaching out to others at conferences or just even emailing people at the professional organizations that you're looking at, like Union of Concerned Scientists or any sort of nonprofit group, is a good way to talk to people to see like, is this even something that you want to do? So like, I want to work on environmental justice things, but like that is super broad. So also talking to other people to see like, what does their day look like? And is that something that you want to do? Because maybe you find that need answered in academia, just not where you were looking. So also recognizing that everything looks different no matter who you talk to, and just having those conversations will help you uncover like your own journey. And it's okay to change in your 5th year of your PhD is what I keep telling myself, but that's what I keep hearing from others as well. So like mantra that to yourself. Thank you, Nicole.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Yes, please.
So don't, this is like from the other side of the table, right? But don't let what you think your advisor thinks about you control your life, right? Mm. Like your advisor will be super pumped if you are happy and doing something that is important with your skill set, right? Going to academics is not the only place to go, right? And it's funny, I mean, it's, 2 of my former students are on this call, right? I don't worry about them, right? Like they graduated, they did a great job, and I was like, done. I've already got a new set of students in here. Like I think about them sometimes, no offense, guys, but I'm not like thinking about them every day being like, what the hell are they doing with their lives, right? Like I already think they're successful. And I think all of your advisors already think you're successful too. So don't play the mind games where you're like, oh, my advisor may, like my advisor from graduate school, I can't imagine she thinks about me once every year when I send her a Christmas card, right? So don't let that control you. Be a scientist and do what you love, right? But also get paid, because not getting paid is kind of lame.
Yeah, and that you jumped to the next question. So then maybe Nicole, if you have anything more to add, have you had students that reached out about alt-ac jobs, and like, are you able to support them? What do you say to support them? And then I think I'm going to tack on the next question on that too. Do you think academia has an issue or problem that they only value tenure track jobs? And how can we start maybe changing that?
So yes, I'll answer the second question first. So I think you sort of pick and chose who you wanted on this panel. And so clearly Chris and I have an open mind, but let's be realistic. Not all faculty members are going to say, great, go and do whatever career you want to do that makes you happy. There are lots of faculty members out there who are going to say, like, you need to go towards academia. And that's hard, but at the end of the day, you live, this is what I always tell my students, you're living your life, not me. I'm not living your life for you. So you need to live the life that you want to live. And who cares if you're in an R1 job or wherever, if you're unhappy. So life is just way too short. So huge kudos to Caitlyn for figuring something out in her 5th year and then having the gumption to actually change and act on it. But your life is so much longer than you can see it right now. And these things are really scary. So it's wonderful when your advisor supports you. And if your advisor doesn't support you, and you're in your 5th year, then maybe just need to finish up and move on. But there are other people out there who will support you. So one thing I just want to say, if I say anything, is like, make sure you find your network. And your network might be reaching out to Caitlyn or Sheila after this call, or reaching out to me or Chris, or it might be your lab mate, or it might be another professor. Like, you have to use everyone. And the reason why I say this, and I say use is in a not aggressive way. If you're not taking advantage of your network, you're putting yourself behind, okay? Because everyone else is taking advantage of their network. And networks, we have to think really broadly about who mentors are. Your mentor is not just your PhD advisor or your MS advisor. Your mentors are your colleagues, students, okay? Your mentors are people you meet at conferences. That is so important. So what when I loved what Caitlyn said, that reach out to your advisor and say, I want to do this kind of work. And your advisor might say, I have no idea how to do that. Like one of my students said to me, I want to do work on like water and developing nations. And I was like, that's great. I have no idea. I will support you. I will put you in touch with people. Get an internship if you can. Apply for everything. When you get that internship, I will support you to go to that internship. We will make this happen. The more you communicate, the more your advisor can help you. And if your advisor doesn't see the direction that you want to go in as valuable, then there's probably a problem. Okay.
I think those are great points. And I just want to throw this back to Sheila. I know that you are going alt ac, and then so I just wanted to ask, like, did you have a supportive kind of interaction with your colleagues, and if or like how did you approach that? How did you approach those questions, or rather, kind of asking for help in this arena?
Yeah, so I say I'm generally interested in like extension positions, which are these positions at, say, like a land-grant university where you're interfacing with researchers and the general public, and as well as like working for smaller companies or nonprofits that are doing like data science related tasks around water. And I'd say like generally I've had a lot of support from my advisors, and so that's been very helpful along the way. And I'd say like right now, at least, I think what has been especially helpful as I am advised by Dr. Natalie Nelson is I've been working on like, I have a professional development plan. And so like going through, sitting down, taking time to say like, these are what my short, medium, and long-term goals are. This is like the career trajectory that I am going towards, and these are the skills that I would need to accomplish to like get to that step. And then I'm communicating with her like what my goals are, and she can see that, and then she can, throw things my way. regarding like positions or opportunities that can help me like build those skills. So she knows like what I'm looking for and how I think I'm gonna go. And then another cool thing that NC State does for its postdocs is every year they help us facilitate like an annual review with our advisor. So in that review, we go back to the professional development plan and say like, how are you doing? Am I helping you enough? How much more can I help you? That's regarding my advisor. So like those things are really helpful, and at least they have been helpful for me most recently.
Caitlyn, did you put your hand up?
Yeah, I was just thinking like, I think that I've heard the full spectrum of people's experiences from people that don't have supportive advisors or people that do. And I'm so happy to hear that NC has that opportunity for review in both ways, in a way that's safe. I would say that if someone doesn't feel supported by their advisor and sees that it might be a toxic situation, start looking for other allies at your university and like a champion for you, especially like, let's say that you're like a fourth year. So I think that when you're maybe a first or second year, switching labs is easy, but maybe you realize that you're like, oh, I've been in a toxic situation for 4 years and I didn't realize it until now. Seeing if there's somebody on your committee that'll be a champion for you and reaching out to them saying, I'm concerned that, I mean, whatever that conversation is going to look like is so person dependent, but like, I'm concerned that I'm having a hard time living up to certain expectations. Can I get help? Or whatever like that specific situation is going to look like, but start finding champions, especially on your committee. And I've gotten the advice that if you can have 2 co-PIs or co-advisors, so that if you have one person that maybe you just don't jive with anymore, that like you always have someone that you can turn to, or if it's someone on your committee, because those are the kind of the gatekeepers in that. Because I think that especially if it's your main advisor, it's really hard to switch if you like, you have the sunken cost theorem of like, well, I'm X years into this, I can't switch now. And you do, just as Nicole mentioned, just want to like power through. Finding someone that'll help fight for you and advocate for you is incredibly important, especially if they're in a decision-making role of your particular career.
Okay, I hope I'm getting a notification that my internet connection's unstable. So just give me a wave if I'm cutting out or if I need to repeat a question. Okay, so thank you. I think that Sheila, that insight of having a development plan, I think that's a great idea. And Caitlyn, I think you know, you do cover a good point about, you know, sometimes while we hope that it's a good relationship, sometimes you just don't get that. And you know, looking elsewhere is really the best you could probably do sometimes. Okay, so we're going to switch to expectations and authorship. We are coming close to 1 o'clock. So panelists, if you need to go at 1 and if we're not quite done, please feel free to exit. I don't want to hold you guys longer than anticipated, but we're going to try and end at 1 because just because that's probably more respectful of your time. So just quickly, you know, Julian and Sheila to start, and then everyone else can probably contribute to this if we miss anything. What are your suggestions for discussing authorship with colleagues, specifically kind of the authorship order and the criteria of authorship? I think that's kind of it's an awkward situation to get into. So how do you guys, or how would you guys approach it if you ran into that issue?
Caitlyn is smiling at me because we're working on a paper together and sort of like talking about this. So I think it's really tricky, but I think the most important thing that I've learned so far in my early career stage is that you really talk about these things like before, like at the beginning. Everyone's nodding their heads. So you're really talking about like, who is going to be first author on this paper? What are the papers that are coming out of this proposal or project? What data sets are we using for these different papers? Who is getting the data sets? You know, like all that stuff, like how are people attributed? We just actually, so I sit in on Dr. Ryan Emanuel's lab meetings at NC State, And we read this paper about co-authorship and why I'm blanking on Dr. Max Liberin, I think is their name. It was a really, and I can send it to you all, so you can send it with a follow-up email or something, but it was helpful to think more broadly about authorship and acknowledgements. So I think that's helpful too, is looking at how other people have thought about authorship. I'll pass it to Julian.
No, I was just thinking about, as a lot of our work is becoming more and more interdisciplinary, and I think a lot of us who are outside academia are just kind of always thinking about all these big ideas. I've been on a lot of kind of these big papers with like more than 10, maybe 20 authors. And I think I agree with Sheila in that at the beginning, there's kind of a contract or an agreement that's developed by consensus on here's who the first author would be. The order is determined by our efforts and what's efforts look like. And so I think definitely at the very beginning that should be talked about. But I think that's a fairly, I think, recent or modern, I don't want to say modern, but I think there are other folks who are more strict on like who, on different positions in the authorship. I think personally, I'm not very wedded to a particular position. I know what my contribution is, and I think that just having that contribution out there, that's what's important to me, not the particular position. So it also depends on you as a person, how that affects your career going into the future. So personally, I don't really need to be first author, and knowing that if it's a large paper, I know that I've contributed already. So I don't really care if I'm first, 15th. I did what I could, and I'm happy that the paper made it. It took years, but it made it out there. So.
I can say from sitting on committees that are hiring faculty members that you should think about where you are on the paper, and if you're doing most of the work, you should be first author. And looking at hiring committees to bring in a tenure track faculty member at Buffalo, we do count first author papers more than you being second author or third author, unless you're the senior person, right? And I will say one time I interviewed for a job, and somebody looked at my CV and they're like, "How come you're always second author on all these papers?" And I said, "Well, my students are first author on the paper. And they're always first author on the paper. They did the work. Like I supported that work. And at my institution, if I'm the second author on the paper and my student is the first author on the paper, my institution for tenure and for promotion counts that as me being the first author on the paper. They count it equally. So if you're mentoring an undergrad right now and the undergrad is first author and you're second author, everyone should recognize that is the same as a first author paper for you. And just to kind of keep that in mind. But man, scientists are bean counters, and it's really easy not to look at stuff and just go to like Google Scholar and be like, okay, their H index is 15, they're good. Their H index is 7. Nope, we're not going to hire these people. And that's stupid, right? And that's going to change, but it's going to take a couple of generations to change. I'm sorry. Like there's some old school people that need to retire.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole other seminar on issues with metrics when it comes to, gender and all that stuff. So, but we'll save that for maybe next year's seminars. But I guess while we have just a few seconds or a few minutes left, maybe Chris and Nicole, could you maybe touch on how maybe you would like if your students felt like they deserved first author, and Chris, you said your students are always first author, so maybe this isn't quite applicable, but how would you like your students to approach you if they felt like they should be first author? Like, is it just saying like, hey, like, I think I deserve this, or do you think that, I don't know, or how can students approach their advisor generally about if they don't feel like they're at the right spot in the author list?
Nicole, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, this is another one of those really difficult conversations. And if it helps, when I was a student, I never would have ever had a conversation like this with my advisor because I would have been terrified, and I hope no one feels that way. But not because of who my advisor was, just because of who I was. So that has nothing to do with my advisor. Just to make that clear. I think, again, these are the kinds of things where turning to your lab mates turning to other people and saying like, hey, I need to have this conversation with Nicole about authorship. How should I approach this? Making sure you take those breaths, sort of like what Chris said. If you're having if you have a conversation with your advisor and they say something about authorship and you don't like it, but you don't know how to respond, take a step back, take 24 hours, take what you need and reflect on it. And then go in and be ready with, why do you think that you should be first author? What have you done to earn that first authorship? I agree with Chris, students are almost always the first author, unless they walk away and they don't care. They're almost always the first author. And so come with the evidence, right? Because we're data driven. Show me what you did. And if your advisor is a reasonable person, they're going to see. And if there's something that you're not seeing, hopefully in a calm environment, they can show you that.
That's perfect, right? That's exactly right. Just show them the evidence that you've done the work. My advisor had a rule that if you didn't write on the paper, you weren't a co-author on the paper. Even if you're a fifth or sixth author, if you didn't write anything, she was just like, forget it, you're not on the paper, right? The other thing that you should think about though, and this is something that you maybe don't always realize, is that if your advisor doesn't have tenure, they have a tremendous amount of pressure to be first author on papers. And so there are some times where an assistant professor will bump a student who has done 95% of the work off as first author and make them first author for their own survival. And that sucks, right? And that's just unfortunate. And you won't know, you don't necessarily know that, right? At the same time, it's my opinion that assistant professors are a lot scrappier and they're really pushing to get stuff out. And so as a result, they can be a lot more supportive than sometimes a full professor on getting work out. But just kind of keep that in mind, because that I have seen that be a problem where a student did 95% of the work and the advisor put their name as first author because it was a matter of them keeping their own careers going, which is, I mean, you know, academics is a game sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, because it's 1 o'clock, I don't really want to keep us too much longer. So I'm going to thank everyone and then pass it on to Julia Masselman for closing remarks. Thank you for the great conversation. This has been super, super insightful, I know, for me, and I'm sure for the rest of the participants as well.